profit ever be taxed?
Well, what I would do is, you know, I haven't gotten to that, but here's a quick answer to that. That the U.S. business would withhold that 10% tax and pay it over to the federal government. I have a similar situation. I have a real estate investment in North Carolina, and before they can remit money, the North Carolina entity has to withhold the tax and send it to the state. We could do the same thing. Very easy.
All right, the reason why I ask is because there's a number of corporations that they pay, you know, they pay their profits to another entity. Let's say that they're in Brazil, or they're in Germany, or someplace like that. And that entity that ends up sending that money back to the actual owner, who happens to be in the United States. And by emitting it overseas first, they filtered it, and they never pay any taxes on it.
Listen, I know very well how complex that can be. And the point is, we would have to make sure that that doesn't happen. I will write rules to make sure that the U.S. gets its share of the tax first. You can do that. You can do that.
Is there any difference between the fair tax and the value-added taxes we'll see in Europe? Yeah, is there any difference between the fair tax and the value-added tax that's present in Europe?
Yes. Yes, there is. The value-added taxes in Europe are also, in effect, at the retail level, they operate the same way, but in Europe, they have taxes paid all through the system. The first business charges VAT to the second business. The second business, to the extent it adds value, charges an additional fair tax of VAT to the third business. So in effect, a lot of the tax gets collected in the system, in the commercial system. And so the last merchant, the retailer, will charge the purchaser the full retail sales tax, but then remits, you know, only a smaller portion to the government. That system has a little less fraud in it than I believe the fair tax would be. It's a totally different system. And by the way, one commenter has said that he thinks that if we had this fair tax, it would collapse, and we might then go to a VAT. But it's a very different system. The fair tax is a pure retail sales tax. There is the fair tax has no tax business to business. It's only the last business to the consumer.
All right, Steve.
By the way, if I don't answer your questions fully, please call me afterwards, and I'll be glad to answer more fully.
All right, Steve, we thank you. We look forward to next month. Everyone, if you go to the Save America Foundation website, our administrators tab at the top. The very first article is all his information, has all his personal information. You can call and get a better connection probably and be able to hear him a little bit better. But he's more than willing to take calls any time of the day, and his email address, all his details are there. And you can see the whole presentation and look through it before the next month's meeting. I want to bring up the second speaker now because we are running on time tonight for a change. We're going to keep it that way. We have Paul St. John, and he's going to have a pretty, as he always does, a pretty good presentation for you. So I'm going to bring up Paul right now.
Okay, good evening. I want to bring to your attention something that the more I look into it, I'm very excited about. I'm excited about because I think it will prevent a revolution in this country. I think it will check the powers of Congress. It's a series of 11 amendments posed by conservative talk show host Mark Levin, and this is his book called The Liberty Amendments. In future meetings, I'm going to, I've researched what the Founding Fathers said and believed on each of these amendments. Tonight I'll just read to you the amendment. The one that I want to go into a little bit is the 11th Amendment. And I'm going to take these a little out of order. This amendment is entitled An Amendment to Grant the States Authority to Check Congress. There are two proposals in Article 5 of the Constitution on how to amend the Constitution. One of them has never been tried before. It was written by James Madison, the founder of, the father of the Constitution, endorsed by Jefferson, and there's quite a bit of information about it. The other one that has never been tried is a provision where the states can hold individual constitutional amendments as short as 1 day. And if 3/5 of the states vote for an amendment, it becomes an amendment. That's never been tried before. It's never been used before. So it's a supermajority of 36 amendments. Now, as you read these amendments, if just one of these is passed, I can promise you there will be such a reversion to the power of the states over the federal government that future legislations will, we only have to do this once. Before the states awaken to the power that exists in the 9th and 10th Amendments, which is mostly ignored. Our first speaker here ignored one of these, which I will read to you. So I'm going to read parts of Mark's book about this amendment to grant the states the authority to check Congress. It says, more than 2 centuries after Jefferson's caution on March 22nd, 2010, the House of Representatives barely passed a nearly 3,000-page Obamacare law by a margin of 219 to 212 without a single Republican vote. As with the initial adoption of Social Security Medicare, there was no great clamor for Obamacare. Moreover, the final version had not been made available to the public until shortly before it was voted on in the House. Consequently, its concealment prevented public scrutiny of its particulars. As then Speaker Nancy Pelosi, just a few weeks prior to the vote, told Legislative Conference for the National Association of Counties, quote, "We have to pass the bill so we can find out what's in it." I'm sure many of you remember that famous Nancy Pelosi quote, "We have to pass the bill in order to find out what's in it." Since its passage more than 3 years ago, the people still do not know the full extent of Obamacare's effects. Meanwhile, thousands of pages of implementing regulations have been issued by the Department of Health and Human Services, the Internal Revenue Service, and other federal entities imposing an untold number of mandates, controls, and costs on citizens. I don't even know if you know it, but if you accept Obamacare, all computers that you own, including business computers and personal computers, are directly funneled into the IRS. The IRS has hired 17,000 new IRS agents just to handle the requirements of Obamacare. That's how pervasive it is. So unpopular was the general proposition of Obamacare, namely the unprecedented role of the federal government to claim over individual health care decisions, that even before the vote on the law, the House leadership was searching for ways to claim members had voted for it without members actually having done so. A stunning violation of the Constitution. In early March 2010, the House Rules Committee proposed a rule to the full House, aka the slaughter rule, providing that upon adaptation of the House on a vote of yeas and nays of one bill, the reconciliation bill, an entirely different bill, H.R. 3590, the Senate bill, Obamacare would be deemed approved by the House. However, Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2 of the Constitution states, and I quote, and our previous speaker should read this, "Every bill which shall have passed the House and Representatives and the Senate shall, before it becomes law, be presented to the President of the United States. Thus, a law is enacted only if a bill contains its exact text, is approved by a majority of the members of the House and the Senate." So what Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2 says is that if it's a House bill and it's a Senate bill, you can't approve one, that the text has to be identical according to the Constitution. Of course, if you've never read the Constitution, as most Americans haven't, and certainly most Congress people haven't, then you wouldn't know that, and our previous speaker apparently doesn't know that either, because he talked about the two bills, saying, well, they're not the same, but they're close enough for government work, but they're not close enough for constitutional work. And we should recognize that. And as George Washington cautioned us, that the Constitution is just a piece of paper. The only safeguards of the Constitution are we the people. If we don't know it and we don't read it, it won't enforce itself. We should be the enforcers of the Constitution. And it's the landmark of this organization to uphold the Constitution. Every bill, thus the law was enacted only if a bill containing its exact text is approved by the majority of the members of the House. The Senate approves precisely the same text, and that text is signed into law by the President. Only after Landmark Legal Foundation threatened to sue the House for its planned subversion of the legislative process did the House leadership relent. Nonetheless, it was chilling that such a wholesale and blatant violation of the Constitution's law making requirements came so close to be in execution. But the congressional goal was clear. As former President Bill Clinton insisted, quote, "It's not important for the bill to be perfect here. It's important to act, to move, to start the ball rolling. There will be amendments to this effect. Whatever they pass next year, or the year after that, there should be amendments to it. It's a big, complicated, organic thing, but the worst thing to do is to do nothing." End of quote. Bill Clinton. In other words, it's important to install a massive health care scheme as quickly as possible before the public could know what it was all about, and there as a possible changeover in the congressional majority in the next election so that it can be amended. On July 21st, 2010, a few months after adopting Obamacare, Congress passed the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Consumer Protection Act. It was more than 2,300 pages long. By the way, it contains text in there that for a bail-in, just like occurred in Cyprus, where 30% of anybody's bank account can be confiscated by the federal government for a national emergency. Quote. Did you read about that in the newspaper? Do you even know that exists? Right? 2,300 pages. During Congress's final negotiations, provisions were added to the bill with little debate and in many cases, no hearings. Dodd-Frank requires 400 separate rulemakings by 11 separate federal agencies. It establishes the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is unparalleled in its powers. It regulates credit and debit cards, mortgages, student loans, savings, and checking accounts, and virtually every other consumer financial product and service. And the law actually attempts to make immune the Bureau from any oversight by any future Congress. 2 years after its passage, more than 8,000 pages of regulatory issuances have occurred. The regulations were only about 30% finished. You have 8,000 pages to implement this. That's an estimate of only 30% of implementing this bill.